This is the third question of logical reasoning drill set number 3 over at lawhub.lsac.org. As always, we're going to select a highlight tool if we don't have one all ready to go, and we're going to engage the question stem first to highlight whatever the task is. In this case, it reads, which one of the following principles, if valid, most supports the political philosopher's reasoning? So we're going to highlight principles, if valid, most supports, understanding that anytime you are seeking an answer choice that will support via principle, whatever the argument states, you're really just looking at a fancy kind of strengthen. So we're going to go read the political philosopher's statements at this point, identify the conclusion, highlight that conclusion for clear reference, and broadly predict what would strengthen that conclusion before engaging the choices. Reading from the top, the political philosopher states, some people advocate the general happiness principle, according to which a government policy is justified if and only if it increases the overall happiness of those affected by it. But since any policy has infinitely many consequences, only a few of them predictable, an accurate estimate of a policy's total impact on happiness cannot be made. Accordingly, any reasonable justification of a government policy should appeal to something other than the general happiness principle. Hopefully, we recognize that whenever there's a recommendation, 97 times out of 100 on the LSAT, that recommendation is going to be the conclusion. And in this case, the political philosopher's conclusion is what we just highlighted. Any reasonable justification of a government policy should appeal to something other than the general happiness principle, which states that a government policy is justified if and only if it increases the overall happiness of those affected by it. But then we learn that because we can't predict the consequences, it's not really applicable, this general happiness principle. So we need to go find a principle that says the general happiness principle isn't applicable to determining government policy in terms of justification because we can't determine what the outcomes are going to be ultimately. So we should have that as a mental prediction before going to the answer choices. Thank you for watching this explanation video of an official LSAT practice question from lawhub.lsac.org. If you're enjoying the tips that it contains, please consider liking the video, and you can also subscribe to our channel to be alerted when new video explanations are released by my guru. Also, check out the description below because within it you'll find links to full sets of video explanations for official LSAT prep tests from lawhub.lsac.org as well. But for now, let's get back to this video. So choice A first, the welfare of people should not in every case be identified with their happiness. There are a lot of reasons that we could potentially eliminate choice A, but I'm going to focus just on the welfare of people. We don't get a general definition of the welfare of people, and we don't need it to go in every case being identified with happiness. So there's way too many logical leaps required to link A to this idea that the government policy should not be justified by the general happiness principle. So we can eliminate A as needing ultimately additional information to relate the welfare of people definitively to that conclusion we highlighted in pink. Next, choice B, principles impractical in their application ought not to be employed. This is incredibly bland, and you can't just eliminate an answer choice for logical reasoning because you're like, this is irrelevant or quote unquote out of scope. We know that there's this issue of being able to accurately estimate the happiness, and that in a way does address the impracticability of the general happiness principle. So worst case scenario, we're going to just leave B open because we're like, this is broadly kind of what the conclusion of the political philosopher is getting at. And if you don't recognize how there is this impracticable aspect in the evidence presented, at worst, leave it open and see if there's other reasons similar to what we found in choice A to eliminate the remaining answer choices. Starting with C. Governmental policies should not be justified in the same way as the actions of individuals. Well, we're only talking about government policy, so the actions of individuals should be immediately not relevant to the conclusion. So we can eliminate choice C for that reason immediately. Next, choice D, political principles are acceptable if at least some of the policies they justify also commend themselves to common sense. This is honestly a personal pet peeve of mine, the usage of the term common sense. We have not defined common sense in this paragraph from the political philosopher, so we cannot relate it to the conclusion in any way. And honestly, you should be wary of people in your life who use common sense too liberally. That's just my own opinion. Next, choice E, any government policy based on unreliable predictions is unlikely to be the most efficient means of attaining the government's objectives. Well, we're not concerned with it being the most efficient means of attaining the government's objectives. We're just saying that the government policy should appeal to something else besides this general happiness principle. So the quality, like being most efficient, isn't actually directly related to this conclusion either. And it really does explain why choice B is the correct answer through elimination, potentially more easily. Although we do have this idea that because we cannot get an accurate estimate of happiness that is made within the construct of the argument, that makes this principle impractical in its application, meaning the general happiness principle, which is why B is the correct answer affirmatively as well.